There's no eating. You're not being paid to eat, so don't. You got any questions?
Not right offhand, no.
You think you can handle it?
Oh, I'll give it the old college try.
Don't touch me!
Hi, Richard, and congratulations on winning this month's 11 Second Club. This is a really awesome piece, and I feel very privileged to be able to give you some feedback on this. So just to give you a bit of context about myself, my name's Arran Baker. I'm a lead animator at Blur Studios, and have a little bit of experience in the past in feature films, TV, and games. And yeah, we can dive into your notes. So overall, I think this is a really great piece. I love how much polish you've been able to get in the amount of time given to you. There's some really fun personality beats in there as well, and I think you've done a really good job with your composition and everything like that. So yeah, I think this is a really good foundation to build everything off of. There's a lot of technical application involved in this as well. So I think you've done really, really good job, and like your context and everything is very clear. One thing I would say off the gate that did catch my eye was how everything is moving from screen right to screen left. And my intuition tells me that from a cinematography perspective, typically we would frame from left to right. So there's something about this that feels a little bit unsettling to me, and that might have been your intention within the tone, but I think given the context, if it were me, I would have almost flopped this image. So with every note that I've given you, I've literally flopped the image so that we're now moving from screen left to screen right. Otherwise, in terms of your camera, I think it's working really well. There's some really nice like nuance to guiding the eye, and there's a little bit of a handheld feel. I quite like how it's framed, where we're quite low down on them. Gives us this like superiority, like we're almost looking above, or like we're looking up to the main sergeant here. So I think that's all working really well. And I like the composition where you've got the field, like the fencing here, which gives you this feeling of, when we look at the composition, everything is guiding in this way, where the heads compositions are aligning with the field, and then you've got some nice verticality, which is all complemented as well. So the only thing that I will say in terms of composition is you might have been able to play around with the placement of the buildings, because right now we have this negative space in the middle, which is quite nice, but we're not really utilizing it to frame our character silhouettes. Like all our complexity is over the top of our character, which kind of complicates the silhouettes. You might have been able to rearrange your set a little bit so that we can maybe make our compositions a little clearer. Otherwise, that's all I had regarding your camera work. I think the rest of it's working really well. It's not overcomplicated, it's simple, it tells the story, and we let the animation breathe. Otherwise, we can dive into some of the nuances. So what we'll do is we'll start out with the screen, in this case, the screen left character, and we'll dive into some of the mechanics. I think overall, a lot of your acting beats are working well. There's only some minor thoughts regarding acting, but a lot of it is more like on animation execution, I would say, and some of the mechanics. Overall, my thought that you might be able to take away from this, at least given the time that you had, is I feel like there's opportunity to track some of your spacing a little bit more, and especially in your overlap and follow through, there's a really nice like punchy timing and rhythmic pattern that you have going on. There's some nice contrast in your timing. But I also do feel, because of that, there's opportunities to maybe break up some of that timing. It feels like a lot of the elements are kind of moving together, and everything's very nice, tight and snappy, but then there's not really any offsets in there. So everything feels like it kind of hits at the same time and it resolves at the same time. So we might be able to loosen that up, especially with limbs and overlap and follow. So you're going to see a lot of recurring notes regarding that. But otherwise, I think the rest of it's in a really good spot. So at the beginning here, I did ask myself, just looking from a performance perspective, if we look at the character, where is he looking right now? When he's looking off screen, because his eyes are quite converged, it looks like he's really focusing on something that's quite close to him. And I know we do this from a peel perspective, but I do wonder if you want to get a little bit more of that contrast and suggest that he's maybe looking around, like if he feels really fixated right now, Whereas if you want to give the idea that he's maybe searching, he's kind of just like, scanning his environment a little bit more, I might be inclined to shift the eyes a little bit more screen left in this case. And maybe you can flip the brows so that everything is framing out to screen left, so that it gives the impression that he's not paying attention to anything on screen right, and he is scanning his environment. Because right now everything feels quite aligned, like his eyes are the same orientation as his head. So just to get, it also kind of helps break up that stuff. And as we come through, I was just tracking a lot of your arm spacing, and up to this point it feels good on the screen left arm. So if I put a little tick, that means it's good. And anything where there's not a tick, it means this is what I check. So if we're coming through here, it feels like this screen left hand is a little bit rigid. And as it's coming through, you might be able to get a little bit of that follow through and that change up. But as we're dragging, we want to tuck in the elbow and use a little bit more follow through in rotation X on the arm, so that it comes around, fixing the screen left arm for now. By the time we get to this point here, the arms aren't so symmetrical like this, but instead they're both framing out a little bit more to screen left. But then the same thing on the screen right arm. So as we take this step down, you might be able to get a little bit of polish where we drag the arm behind, and then as the weight comes up, then we get the follow through of the arm coming down after after the weight comes down. This is also an opportunity where you can like drag the shoulders for that, because you've got some nice volume, squash and stretch in there, but I feel like it's not always necessarily, again, it's a timing thing. So I would drag so that we offset the timing of the shoulders. Then as the weight comes down, you can get a little bit of that spring and that follow through happen in the shoulders, as well as it will pass through into the arms. Also, just looking at some of the connectivity in the neck, it feels like the spine, if we look at this, we got this nice line of action in the spine, but then we're not really following that through into the neck. And whilst we can have a little bit of that counteraction to kind of keep our head balanced, in this case, because the neck is so long, it makes it very distinct that there is a disconnection between what the neck is doing versus what the spine is doing. So I would just slightly tilt. I think it's a little bit in Z. It might also be a little bit in X, where the neck needs to be a little bit more screen left, essentially, but you'll do that with both axes. I think the head orientation itself is fine, but it's just the neck connection. Then as you're coming through, again, you're getting a little bit of follow through in the X, then you continue to drag the X as you're coming around, then it passes through. So I can remove this line here. That was just described earlier, but now you can see that you get a little bit of follow through. You're changing up the axes, because right now it feels like your upper arm, you're not really separating the timing of each of your axes. They all kind of have the same timing, which makes it feel a little bit rigid and postable. When we get to this point here, it does feel like his eye line. I'm under the assumption he's supposed to be looking at the sergeant for a beat here, and then he continues to scan again. But when I look at this framing, it does definitely look like he's looking more to screen right. And I don't know, maybe that was your intention. Maybe he isn't supposed to be looking at the sergeant, but because we're so close to our eye line, it does make it feel like maybe we should be looking at him. So even if there's a beat where he's like, oh yeah, okay, now I'm off here again. So just have that little beat where he does like acknowledge him, but then he kind of looks around again. So he's trying to pay attention, but he's too preoccupied with everything around him. I think that might be quite nice, and I feel like that kind of complements the idea of this character you're trying to convey. Then again, this is a good opportunity to like have a little bit more of that brow connection. So you do have a beat earlier here where we can see that there's a nice little bit of asymmetry in the brow, but then as he looks more to screen right here, I would also get a little bit of a connection, so the brows might raise a little bit because he starts to look a bit higher, because the brows just feel a little bit rigid there. And I was looking at your spine. Now, if we just track your spine, you shift over, which is nice, and we feel like we get a little bit of that contraposter going in spine here, which is nice. So this part feels good. But then as we come over, see how everything like translates together? So at this stage, it does make your spine feel quite IK, which is most likely what you're using there. I get the impression you're using a lot of IK in the rig. But because of that, it doesn't feel like there's any compression in the midsection of the spine. It feels like it does literally feel like there are 2 points, and everything in between that is just a direct line that's connecting the two, rather than having that nice curvature where we feel those compressions. So again, it's a little bit of a workflow thing, but it also kind of complements into the polish. So again, we'll ignore these notes for a moment. We'll just focus on the screen left guy. So as he turns here, this head turn feels very rigid in terms of orientation. It feels like the head is just going in one axis. And you are adding a little bit of translation Y on the head to kind of give you a bit of that squash and stretch feeling, the overlap and follow through, but then you're not doing that in rotation X. So it'd be nice just to get a little bit of that X coming back and forth. It can be subtle. But on top of that, a nice little technique that I like to use is as you start an action, separate those axes up even more. You can lead or drag with the rotation Z. So obviously we're using a lot of Y in our head. If we want to get that nice lead, you can almost bank the head first, then come through. We can do the opposite, where you begin to lead, you drag the Z behind, and then you follow through later. So it's just trying to break up those orientations in each of your head turns and giving them more intention and specificity. I think can add a nice layer, and it's not too difficult to address. And as we're coming through here, I was just looking at the weight shift. And if I just turn off the notes for a second, as I scrub through this, he shifts his weight over to his screen left leg, which is good. But he kind of holds here for a long time, then shifts over. And I do wonder if that maybe just felt a little bit rigid. We kind of stick there for a little bit too long. And just to give it that little bit of looseness and a little bit more weight, I would maybe try easing out in X a little bit more on the root, just so it doesn't stick. Then we go again. It's just that little bit of a, and we're out again. So it's just easing it out a little bit more during that time. As we're coming through, so this section I think is really fun. I love how much you're pushing things through here with this reaction. Now, the main sentiment to take away from this section is, again, offsetting the timing on your arms and then adding more overlap and follow. And then tracking your spacing. So as we come down here, I would drag the forearms a little bit more and then have them follow through. And then as you come up, you can slightly drag the screen left arm, in this case I've chosen to, a little bit longer. So you see how there's a little bit of that follow through happens a little bit more, like it happens later on the screen left arm. So you're breaking up the timing on your arms so they don't hit and settle at the same time. You get that little bit of an offset. And then because we can use a little bit of that follow through, by the time we come down again, we're laying and dragging the arm. So right now it feels like you have the same timing of your arms kind of going into their action. It might be quite nice again to separate that, so you can have one lead the action more while the other one drags behind, and then it comes through later. So this is also going to give you this nice S-like flow going through the arms. So we're exaggerating the contrast in our lead and follow. So we're leading up with the elbow more, and then dragging behind with the wrist. Then it follows through. And you can see how, I know how you're using bend bones and you're like breaking the anatomy of the arm here to get that nice drag. I think this is actually a good opportunity. If you're going to do that, let's exaggerate it more. So as we're coming through, see I'm really dragging like leading with the elbow and then dragging behind with the hand. Then it comes through. So now we're getting this nice opposing action where as the hand's coming down, the arm's coming up on the opposite side. So we're reading, you do have that already, but we're reading that contrast even more. Then as we're coming through, I was just tracking your spacing, because as you get through here in your version, this hand does kind of stick in here a little bit too long. As we ease out, again, it gets a little bit linear. If I track the spacing on the screen left arms, it comes through here. It's a little bit linear. And then here it sticks for a frame, for instance, and then it carries on through. So it's just tracking your spacing to clean that stuff up. So I would have the hand drag for longer, and then as it comes through, we swing we follow through and overshoots the forearm, hold for longer, drags behind. Then as the weight comes through, then we feel that follow through drop down into the... As I play this through, you'll kind of get that feeling.
Now right offhand, no.
That little rhythm in there. So I think it's taking what you've got and we're just emphasizing those elements a bit. Same thing with the screen right arm. You see how I'm exaggerating the breakup. So it's taking what you've got, but just making it a little bit clearer. And then as you're coming down, we can drag the hand a little bit more, the forearm. Then as it follows through in here, I don't really feel that breakup in the overlap and follow through of your arms. But it's the hand, then it comes through, so you feel that follow through change. We're still, again, leading up with the elbow. And as we come around, we begin to lead down with the elbow as we're following through in the X. So again, it's just separating up that timing so that all your rotations don't have the same timing. So it's not up, down. It's follow through. And then also I was just looking at the weight and the balance in this pose. And as you come up, step down here, it feels like we're leaning forward at this stage a little bit too much, but then it stops. So it feels like you're beginning to follow through your momentum, but then I stop out of nowhere and then just go down. So to compensate for that and actually give you a little bit more exaggeration, I would actually drive the hips, your root, further forward and then arch the spine more. That way we're separating up our overlap and follow through in our translations and rotations of our root control. So you're driving forward the hips, you're dragging back to the chest. Then as you overshoot, you then begin to drive the hips back as you're following through in your rotation. So see here at this stage, this is our most extreme in our line of action. Then as we get to this stage, we're now beginning to realign. Then you get to this point here. But then as we come down, I'd expect to see maybe the hips go a little bit further back in translation Z, follow through in the chest. And then again, you can drag the head. Then later you follow through with the head. We're just breaking up those things a little bit more. And again, you don't have to go crazy with it. It's just, it can be subtle. But just having that little bit of nuance in there, I think will really help. Same thing here, as he does this head turn. I think you can just, everything kind of has a similar timing, so it's easing out the head earlier, just so you push that lead and follow, so that we get that nice scoop feeling where something's leading a bit more. Then as you come out here, this is a very subtle polish thing, but just tracking your spacing, your hand between these two keys feels a little linear. See how the spacing feels quite equal. So I like the frame where you favor the down here, but then I begin to ease out that forearm more at this stage. Then we're back to this frame, which is good. It's just that one frame, but it'll just help fix that spacing. Then as you're coming down here, again, similar sentiments. So we're leading more with the head. As you come through, we're exaggerating the lead and follow, so you're stretching and getting more volume change in the spine and head. And what I would actually do is slightly delay the hand bump so that we get more clarity there. So instead of everything happening at the same time, where you lunge and jab with his arm at the same time, I would have a beat where we come up, lean, bump, and then come out again. So what I've done is, as we're coming through, slightly change the orientation of this hand so everything's kind of framing this way. And you can see how we're still holding the body back, but we hold for a beat with the hand outwards. And again, we're reading the clarity more on the arm silhouettes. And then it holds, boom, it hits, comes through. That way we read the gesture and the beat more of that hands doing the jab. I can play that through and you might get that feeling.
College try.
Don't. So it's whoop, as opposed to and out. So instead of having it all together, we're separating those beats a little. And then it comes out. And again, just looking at that clarity. So by the time you reach this point here, we're tucking the arm in and we're reading both forms so that they're not stacking over each other too much. And then again, this is a good opportunity where you can drag the forearm more using rotation X on the Again, this is assuming if you were using FK, but I get the impression you're not probably using IK. And then in here, then we get that follow through. So you're still feeling that weight come through, and I do like the weight you have on that arm there. I do feel it come through and hit, but you almost can exaggerate that even more, and you'll register that beat a bit more as well. And then by the end here, I think we can just, again, complement the asymmetry of everything going out the screen right. Then, if we jump over to your second character, I didn't have as many notes. I think a lot of it is working really well. Just as he's coming down here, I was looking at the spacing, and again, similar thing. So he comes down, he accents, it sticks, which feels really good. So I like the overshoot and the ease out. So that feels nice and punchy. Then as we come up, it feels like to follow through and spring back up again. Then hold for a bit longer. Then as the weight comes down, the dragging, then we get the follow through on the forearm. It's very subtle. You'll just feel that little bit of weight. Right now, that hand feels like it's stuck to the root a bit. Then in here, again, this is where it starts to feel IK, because everything just sticks and holds. So I would, at this stage, begin to ease in and just get a little bit more follow through, even if it slightly overshoots, then comes back out again. And then you might be able to break up a tiny bit, some overlap and follow through on the wrist. Again, this is all polished stuff. It's not very broad. It's just things that will help make it even better. Same thing here. If I look at the posing, see his spine, he eases out, and then it sticks. It just hits a wall here. So in the spine, you might be able to get a little bit of a follow through, even if it overshoots and settles back, just so that the spacing doesn't just ease out and stick. Like we need to get that little bit of that overshoot, then come back. Then similar thing in here, get a little bit of that follow through. See how it comes through and sticks there. So I'd expect it to follow through, overshoots, then settle. He then goes up into this. I think maybe we got too much contrast and too much range of that hand coming down to then come back up. So I would almost have the arm stay in place for a bit longer so the forearm doesn't drop so much, so it feels more controlled. And then that might help register this change here as it eases out and hits into the salute. And all of this felt really good. He's doing his cycle. I like the bending on the wrist and the drag. The way he picks up the gun is great through here. I really like the reaction and the elbow. I like how it leads with the elbow, then it gets a little bit of follow through. All the cloth animation is really nice. The weight on the gun is also really good. So you got plenty of great stuff going on in here. The only thing that I would say is at this last beat, exaggerates it a little bit more. I do like, and I'm usually one in favor of keeping performances subtle and natural, and not going too big for the sake of it. But in this case, listening to the dialogue, I think you could go a little bit further. And I'm not necessarily saying like change the whole pose or go crazy with it. But when he says, touch me, I think you can just involve the walk a little bit more, like get his body a little bit more involved in how much he lunges. And that might help reinforce the idea of how loud he's yelling. Like, don't touch me. So I think in that moment, you almost want him to go a little bit out of composure. I love that he's got this like quite repetitive walk because it feels contextually correct, like he's in a march. He's been drilled to walk a certain way. That all makes sense. But at the end, I quite like the idea that he might lose a tiny bit of composure. It's like when you see like the Queen's Guards and everyone's trying to tickle them to try and lose composure. I kind of like that he would break him a little bit here. I think that kind of gives it more character. All it's a case of is as he lunges, we involve his spine and his root and his balance a little bit more. That by the end, he's just leaning a little bit further over. Maybe that means that this screen left foot would lean over more. This helps reinforce this line of action, gives us a little bit more contrast, and just makes our framing a little bit more appealing. Which in that pose a little bit more. And by extension, you might be able to get a little bit bigger of a reaction from this guy because he seems a little bit more flamboyant. So it'd be nice to feel like there's a slightly bigger take. You can accentuate the volume of his face. Maybe his body lean back a bit more. Maybe he startles. You can always do a little step. I know you don't want to do too much change at the end of a shot, but I feel like there's something that we could add in there, maybe a little bit more nuance, just to give it that little bit more personality and a bit more of a natural reaction based on the style that you've already established. But otherwise, I think the rest of it's working really well. So yeah, I hope this has been really useful for you, and keep up the great work. It's looking awesome. Take care.